When did protecting the star athlete become more important than believing I was assaulted at that party? I woke up on a couch in the basement of Derek Chambers' house at 3 in the morning with my shirt on backwards and no memory of the past 4 hours. My phone had 6 missed calls from my mom and 12 texts from my best friend Kira asking where I was. The room was spinning when I sat up and I could taste vomit in the back of my throat. My underwear was missing. I stood on shaking legs and stumbled toward the stairs while trying to piece together what had happened after I'd taken that drink from Trevor Walsh at the homecoming party. Trevor was the quarterback for Riverside High, a senior with college scouts watching his every game, and he'd handed me a red Solo cup around 11 while saying I looked tense and needed to relax. I remembered taking one sip, then nothing until waking up on this couch with my clothes wrong and my body aching in ways that made my stomach drop. I found my shoes by the basement door and my jacket crumpled on the floor near the beer pong table. No one else was in the basement, but I could hear voices upstairs, people still at the party even though it was the middle of the night. I climbed the stairs and found Derek in the kitchen with 3 other football players. They went quiet when they saw me, and Derek's expression shifted from casual to alert in a way that made my skin crawl. He asked if I was okay, and I said I needed to call my mom. He handed me my purse, which had been sitting on the counter, and I checked my phone to find a new video message from an unknown number. I opened it with trembling hands and felt the room tilt when I saw what was on the screen. The video showed me unconscious on that basement couch with my shirt pulled up and someone's hands on my body. The video showed Trevor Walsh leaning over me while another player held the camera and laughed. The video was 15 seconds long, and I watched it twice before my brain could process what I was seeing. I looked up at Derek and asked what happened. He said Trevor had taken me downstairs because I was drunk and needed to lie down. He said I'd been flirting with Trevor all night and everyone saw us leave together. He said I should probably go home and sleep it off. I left the house and walked 3 blocks before my legs gave out, and I sat on the curb crying while trying to call my mom. She picked up on the first ring, and I could hear the worry in her voice when she asked where I was. I told her I was at a party and something bad happened and I needed her to come get me. She said she'd be there in 10 minutes and told me to stay on the phone. I sat on that curb holding my phone and shaking while cars passed, and the reality of what Trevor Walsh had done to me settled into my bones. My mom arrived in her bathrobe and rushed out of the car to wrap her arms around me. I showed her the video on my phone and watched her face transform from concern to horror to rage. She said we were going to the hospital right now, and then we were calling the police. I said I didn't remember anything and maybe nothing happened. She said the video showed exactly what happened and we needed evidence before it disappeared. She drove me to the emergency room while I stared out the window and tried to understand how my life had changed in 4 hours. The hospital rape kit exam took 3 hours and felt worse than the assault I couldn't remember. The nurse practitioner was kind but clinical, taking photos and samples while explaining each step. She found bruising and tearing that indicated forced penetration. She asked if I wanted to file a police report, and I said yes, even though my hands wouldn't stop shaking. A police officer named Detective Barbara Young arrived around 7 in the morning and took my statement in a private room. I showed her the video on my phone and watched her expression harden as she watched Trevor Walsh assault me while I was unconscious. She said this was clear evidence of sexual assault and she would be opening an investigation immediately. She asked who else was at the party, and I gave her Derek Chambers' name and address. She said she would be contacting him for a witness statement. I asked what would happen to Trevor, and she said that depended on the evidence and the district attorney's decision about charges. She said cases involving athletes could be complicated, but that shouldn't matter because the law applied to everyone equally. My mom took me home and I showered for 40 minutes trying to wash away the feeling of violation that covered my skin. I checked my phone and found texts from people at the party saying they'd heard I'd hooked up with Trevor Walsh. One text from a girl named Alexis said congratulations because Trevor never hooked up with juniors. I felt sick reading these messages. I texted Kira and told her what happened. She called immediately and I could hear her crying as I explained about waking up with no memory and the video and the hospital. Kira said she would kill Trevor Walsh herself if she ever saw him again. She said everyone at school was talking about me and Trevor and most people thought we just hooked up. I said we needed to tell people the truth. Kira said people wouldn't believe it because Trevor was too important and I was just a junior who'd been drinking at a party. Her words made me angry even though I knew she was right about how people would react. Monday morning I went to school with my mom because she insisted on speaking to Principal Edward Grayson about what happened. We sat in his office while my mom explained that I'd been sexually assaulted by Trevor Walsh at a party and that there was video evidence and a police investigation. Principal Grayson listened with his hands folded on his desk and his expression giving away nothing. When my mom finished, he asked if I was certain about what happened. I said I had a rape kit exam and a video showing Trevor assaulting me while I was unconscious. He said the video showed concerning behavior, but it wasn't clear whether the encounter was consensual before I passed out. My mom's voice went sharp when she said an unconscious person cannot consent to sex. Principal Grayson said he understood, but Trevor was claiming the encounter had been consensual and I'd passed out afterward. He said he would conduct a school investigation, but that I needed to understand how serious it was to accuse Trevor Walsh of rape when college scouts were watching him and his entire future was at stake. I felt something break inside me when Principal Grayson prioritized Trevor's football career over my assault. My mom stood up and said she would be contacting the school board and a lawyer. Principal Grayson said he was trying to handle this appropriately, but that he had to consider all sides of the story. He said I should probably take a few days off school while he conducted his investigation. My mom said I had every right to attend school safely, and that Trevor should be the one removed from campus. Principal Grayson said he couldn't suspend Trevor without completing his investigation, and he couldn't base school discipline on accusations alone. He said if the police investigation resulted in charges, then he would take appropriate action. My mom asked what I was supposed to do while Trevor walked around school as if he'd done nothing wrong. Principal Grayson suggested I could do independent study from home until things settled down. I understood then that the school was going to protect Trevor Walsh because his quarterback skills mattered more than my rape. That afternoon, Detective Young called to say she'd interviewed Derek Chambers and the 3 football players who'd been in the kitchen. All 4 claimed I'd been flirting with Trevor at the party and had gone to the basement with him willingly. They said I'd been drinking heavily and no one realized I was as drunk as I apparently was. They said Trevor told them we'd hooked up but that I'd been conscious and participating. Detective Young said their statements contradicted the video evidence but that the defense would argue the video only showed one moment and didn't prove the entire encounter was non-consensual. She said the district attorney would need to review the case before deciding whether to file charges. I asked how long that would take and she said it could be weeks or months depending on the caseload. I asked what I was supposed to do while Trevor Walsh attended school and everyone treated him as if nothing had happened. She said she couldn't give me legal advice but that documenting everything and staying safe were important. I went back to school on Wednesday because my mom couldn't afford to quit her job to homeschool me, and I refused to let Trevor take away my education. The stares started the moment I walked into the building. Conversations stopped when I passed and started again in whispers once I'd gone by. Someone had spray-painted "liar" on my locker in red paint. I reported it to the office and the secretary said they'd have maintenance clean it but asked if I was sure I wanted to be at school right now, given everything that was happening. I asked what she meant and she said the situation with Trevor was creating a lot of tension, and maybe it would be better if I transferred to another school. I said Trevor was the one who raped me and I wasn't going anywhere. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me and told me to get to class. In first period English, half the class wouldn't look at me and the other half stared openly. My teacher, Mrs. Kowalski, asked me to stay after class and told me she was sorry about what I was going through, but that I needed to consider how my accusations were affecting Trevor's future. By lunchtime, I understood that the entire school had decided I was lying. The football team walked past my table and one of them knocked my books onto the floor while calling me an attention seeker. No one helped me pick them up except Kira, who'd been sitting with me despite her other friends avoiding our table. She said this was exactly what she'd been afraid would happen. She said Trevor Walsh was too popular and too important for people to believe he'd done something wrong. I said the truth didn't depend on his popularity, and eventually people would have to face reality. Kira said I was underestimating how much people would ignore to protect someone they'd invested in. That afternoon, Trevor approached me in the hallway between classes. He got close enough that I could smell his cologne and said I needed to drop this before I destroyed both our lives. He said what happened at the party was a misunderstanding, and if I kept pushing it, he'd make sure everyone knew what a drunk mess I'd been. I stepped back and told him to stay away from me. He smiled and said he could do whatever he wanted because everyone believed him instead of me. That night, someone created a social media account dedicated to attacking me. The account posted photos of me at the party with captions calling me a slut and a liar. It posted screenshots of text messages I'd sent to Trevor before the party saying I thought he was hot and wanted to talk to him. The context of those messages was that I'd had a crush on him and been flattered by his attention at the party before he drugged and raped me, but the account presented them as proof I'd wanted to hook up with him. Within hours, the account had 300 followers and people were sharing the posts across multiple platforms. My mom reported it, but the platform said it didn't violate their terms of service. I watched my reputation destroyed in real time while Trevor's remained intact. Comments on the post called me a jealous girl trying to ruin a good guy's life. They said I regretted hooking up with him and was claiming rape to avoid looking bad. They said girls who drank at parties deserved whatever happened to them. Detective Young called on Friday to say the district attorney had reviewed my case and decided not to file charges against Trevor Walsh. She said the DA felt the evidence wasn't strong enough to secure a conviction because Trevor's defense would argue the video didn't show the entire encounter and that I'd been conscious and willing before passing out. The DA felt a jury wouldn't convict a star athlete based on one video and witness testimony from people who claimed the encounter was consensual. Detective Young said she was sorry and that she believed me, but the legal system required evidence that met a higher standard than what we currently had. I asked about the rape kit and she said it proved sex occurred but not that it was forced. I asked about the video showing me unconscious and she said the defense would argue that was just one moment in a longer consensual encounter. I hung up and screamed into my pillow until my throat hurt. My mom contacted a lawyer named Patricia Brennan who specialized in sexual assault cases. Patricia met with us that Saturday and reviewed all the evidence. She said we could file a civil lawsuit against Trevor and potentially Derek Chambers for hosting the party where I was assaulted. She said civil cases had a lower burden of proof than criminal cases and we might win even though the DA had declined to prosecute. She said the lawsuit would be expensive and emotionally draining and would likely take years to resolve. She said Trevor's family would hire expensive lawyers who would try to destroy my credibility in every way possible. My mom asked what our chances were and Patricia said maybe 50-50 depending on the jury. She said the video was powerful evidence, but Trevor's lawyers would argue it showed only seconds out of a longer encounter. She said my prior text to Trevor showing I'd been interested in him would be used to suggest I'd wanted to hook up. She said my drinking at the party would be held against me, even though being drunk didn't mean I consented to sex. I returned to school on Monday to find that someone had printed copies of the social media posts and taped them to walls throughout the building. Photos of me with the word liar written across them covered the hallways. I pulled them down as fast as I could, but there were too many and people were taking photos of them before they could be removed. In third period history class, the teacher, Mr. Reynolds, made us debate whether false rape accusations were worse than actual rape. He said it was an important topic given current events, and we needed to think critically about both sides. I sat in that class while my classmates argued that false accusations ruined men's lives and were therefore worse than rape, which could at least be overcome with therapy. I raised my hand and said I'd been raped and it wasn't something you just got over. Mr. Reynolds said we were discussing hypotheticals and I shouldn't make it personal. I walked out of class and went to the counselor's office where Mrs. Delgado told me I should consider transferring schools for my own well-being. That afternoon, Principal Grayson called me to his office and said he'd completed his investigation. He said he'd interviewed multiple witnesses who confirmed I'd been drinking heavily at the party and had left with Trevor willingly. He said the video was concerning but didn't prove assault because it didn't show how the encounter began. He said he'd talked to Trevor, who maintained that everything had been consensual until I passed out and he'd tried to help me. Principal Grayson said there wasn't enough evidence to discipline Trevor and that continuing to accuse him was creating a hostile environment for other students. He said if I didn't stop making accusations, he would have to consider whether my behavior was disruptive to the educational environment. I asked if he was threatening to suspend me for reporting my own rape. He said he was trying to restore order to the school, and I needed to understand that my accusations had consequences for everyone. He said Trevor had college scouts coming to watch him play, and these accusations could destroy everything he'd worked for his entire life. I asked Principal Grayson if he cared at all about what Trevor had destroyed in my life. He said he empathized with my situation, but that he had to make decisions based on evidence, and right now there wasn't enough evidence to conclude assault had occurred. I asked about the video, and he said it showed poor judgment from both of us, but not necessarily a crime. I asked what he would tell his own daughter if she'd been raped and no one believed her. His face hardened, and he said that was inappropriate and I needed to leave his office. I left and walked straight out of the school building. I didn't stop walking until I reached the park 3 blocks away, where I sat on a swing and cried until I couldn't breathe. Kira found me an hour later and sat on the swing next to me while I told her what Principal Grayson had said. She asked if we could go to the media with this story. I said I didn't know if anyone would care about one girl being raped when it might hurt a football team's chances at state championships. My mom filed a formal complaint with the school district about Principal Grayson's handling of my assault. The complaint detailed his refusal to discipline Trevor, his victim-blaming statements, and his threat to suspend me for reporting rape. The district assigned an investigator named Donald Chen from the central office who interviewed me, my mom, Principal Grayson, and several teachers. The investigation took 3 weeks, during which I attended school while being harassed daily by Trevor's friends and supporters. Someone threw a drink at me in the cafeteria. Someone keyed my mom's car in the school parking lot. Someone posted my home address online with a caption suggesting people should visit me to discuss my accusations. My mom reported everything to the police, but nothing changed. Detective Young said unless we could prove who was responsible, there wasn't much she could do. The harassment was anonymous and coordinated and designed to make me give up and go away. The district investigator concluded that Principal Grayson had handled my case inappropriately and recommended additional training on Title IX procedures. The recommendation included no actual consequences for Principal Grayson and no changes to Trevor's status at school. The investigator's report said that while Principal Grayson's language had been insensitive, he had technically followed protocol by conducting an investigation before making disciplinary decisions. The report said the lack of criminal charges against Trevor meant the school couldn't impose severe discipline without exposing themselves to liability. The report said my ongoing accusations against Trevor were creating a hostile environment and suggested mediation between me and Trevor to resolve our conflict. I read that report and understood that the school district cared more about protecting themselves from lawsuits than protecting students from rape. My mom contacted Patricia Brennan and told her to file the civil lawsuit immediately. The lawsuit named Trevor Walsh, Derek Chambers, and Riverside High School as defendants. It alleged sexual assault, negligence, and violation of Title IX protections. The filing made local news because Trevor was being recruited by major college football programs, and the lawsuit threatened his eligibility. The community response was immediate and vicious. People created social media groups dedicated to defending Trevor and attacking me. They organized fundraisers for his legal defense. They wore "I Stand with Trevor" shirts to his football games. The local newspaper ran editorials questioning whether I was motivated by jealousy or attention-seeking. Parents wrote letters to the school board demanding I be expelled for making false accusations. The football team's parents started a petition to have me removed from school for disrupting the team's focus during their championship season. I watched an entire town choose a rapist over his victim because his ability to throw a football mattered more than my humanity. Trevor's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, claiming it was frivolous and motivated by malice. They argued I'd been drunk and willing and had no evidence of force or lack of consent. They argued the video showed only seconds and didn't prove anything about the encounter's nature. They argued I was trying to ruin Trevor's life because I regretted a consensual hookup. Patricia filed a response detailing the medical evidence, the video evidence, and the pattern of institutional failure to protect me. She argued that Trevor had incapacitated me with drugs or alcohol and then raped me while I was unconscious. She argued the school had violated federal law by failing to investigate properly and by allowing retaliation against me. The judge scheduled a hearing to determine whether the case would proceed to trial. Patricia said the hearing would be crucial because if we lost the motion to dismiss, we would lose everything. The hearing happened 3 months after I filed the lawsuit. I sat in the courtroom with my mom and watched Trevor's lawyers present their case for dismissal. They called witnesses who testified that I'd been flirting with Trevor and had wanted to hook up with him. They showed my text messages to Trevor from before the party. They presented social media posts where I'd commented on Trevor's photos and called him hot. They argued I'd pursued Trevor aggressively and had been thrilled when he paid attention to me at the party. They presented witnesses who said I'd been drinking heavily and dancing provocatively. They argued I'd gone to the basement with Trevor willingly and had only claimed assault after I regretted what happened. Patricia cross-examined these witnesses and got several to admit they hadn't actually seen me and Trevor go downstairs together. She got Derek Chambers to admit he'd never checked on me after Trevor took me to the basement, even though I'd been visibly intoxicated. She got one of Trevor's teammates to admit they'd been instructed by their coach to support Trevor's story no matter what. Patricia played the video in court and I watched the judge's face change as he saw Trevor Walsh assaulting my unconscious body. The video was 15 seconds, but those 15 seconds were undeniable proof of what Trevor had done. Patricia argued that no matter what happened before that video was recorded, the video itself showed me unconscious and being assaulted, which could never be consensual. Trevor's lawyers argued the video was taken out of context and didn't show the full evening. Patricia presented the medical evidence showing injuries consistent with forced penetration. She presented my hospital records showing Rohypnol in my system, which I'd never taken voluntarily. Trevor's lawyers argued I could have taken Rohypnol myself to get high. Patricia asked why I would take a date rape drug voluntarily at a party. Trevor's lawyers said teenagers did reckless things all the time. The hearing lasted 6 hours and ended with the judge saying he would issue a written decision within 2 weeks. The judge denied the motion to dismiss and ruled that my case could proceed to trial. He wrote in his decision that the video evidence combined with the medical evidence created sufficient questions of fact that required a jury to decide. He wrote that while Trevor's defense had merit, the totality of evidence suggested assault had occurred and that I deserved my day in court. The decision made news and shifted the community conversation slightly. Some people who'd been attacking me went quiet. Some people started questioning whether they'd been too quick to defend Trevor. But most people doubled down and insisted the judge was biased and that I was manipulating the legal system. Trevor's supporters organized protests outside the courthouse. They created new social media campaigns attacking me and Patricia. They sent death threats to my home. My mom hired a security system and we stopped answering the door unless we were expecting someone. Discovery in the lawsuit revealed information that Patricia said was explosive. Trevor's phone records showed he'd texted a friend saying he was going to get me drunk and hit that at the party. The text showed premeditation and intent. Derek Chambers' phone had photos and videos from the party, including footage of Trevor putting something in my drink before handing it to me. The photos showed me going from alert to stumbling in the span of 15 minutes. Patricia found 3 other girls who said Trevor had assaulted them at previous parties, but they'd never reported it because they knew no one would believe them. These girls agreed to testify that Trevor had a pattern of targeting drunk girls, and that he'd bragged about getting away with it. Patricia found text messages between football players discussing how to protect Trevor and coordinate their witness statements. The evidence built a picture of systematic predation and cover-up that extended beyond my assault to include multiple victims and institutional enablers. Trevor's lawyers tried to block the other victims from testifying, claiming their experiences were irrelevant to my case. Patricia argued the testimony established a pattern of behavior that showed Trevor's intent and methods. The judge ruled the testimony was admissible as evidence of pattern and practice. He also ruled that Derek Chambers' photo of Trevor drugging me was admissible despite defense arguments that it was taken illegally. The trial was scheduled for 8 months after I filed the lawsuit. Patricia said we had a strong case now with the additional evidence, but that trials were unpredictable, and juries might still side with Trevor because of his status. She said we needed to be prepared for anything. I said I was prepared to tell the truth and let people decide whether they cared more about football or rape. The trial started on a Monday in November. The courtroom was packed with reporters and community members. Trevor's supporters filled half the gallery wearing their I Stand With Trevor shirts. My supporters, fewer in number, sat on the other side. The jury was selected over 2 days and included 7 women and 5 men, mostly middle-aged professionals. Patricia said the jury composition was favorable, but that we couldn't assume women would automatically believe me. The trial began with opening statements. Trevor's lawyer painted me as a jealous girl who'd pursued Trevor aggressively and then claimed assault when he didn't want a relationship. He said I'd been drinking heavily and had consented to sex but didn't remember it because of my intoxication. He said I was trying to ruin Trevor's life and steal his future because I regretted my choices. Patricia's opening statement presented the medical evidence, the video evidence, the drugging evidence, and the pattern of prior assaults. She said Trevor Walsh was a predator who used his status to target vulnerable girls, and that institutions had protected him because they valued his athletic ability more than his victims' lives. The prosecution's case took 3 days. Patricia called me to testify first, and I spent 4 hours on the witness stand describing the party, waking up on the couch, discovering the video, and reporting to police. I described the rape kit exam and the trauma of not remembering my own assault. I described the harassment at school and the institutional failure to protect me. Trevor's lawyer cross-examined me aggressively, asking about every drink I'd had at the party, every text I'd sent Trevor, every comment I'd made about him before the assault. He asked if I'd dressed provocatively at the party. He asked if I'd danced suggestively. He asked if I'd kissed Trevor before going to the basement. I said no to all of these questions because they weren't true, but I could see him planting doubts in the jury's minds. Patricia called Detective Young, who testified about the investigation and the evidence she'd gathered. She said the case had strong evidence, but the DA had declined prosecution because of Trevor's status and the difficulty of convicting athletes in the jurisdiction. Patricia called the medical examiner who'd conducted my rape kit, and she testified about the injuries she'd documented and the presence of Rohypnol in my system. She said the injuries were consistent with forced penetration and that Rohypnol was commonly used as a date rape drug. Trevor's lawyer asked if the injuries could have resulted from rough but consensual sex, and the examiner said technically yes, but the totality of evidence suggested force. Patricia called Derek Chambers, who admitted under oath that he'd hosted the party, that he'd seen Trevor put something in my drink, that he'd taken photos of it happening, and that he hadn't stopped it because Trevor was his friend and teammate. His testimony was devastating because it confirmed premeditation and drugging. Trevor's lawyer tried to discredit Derek by pointing out he'd been granted immunity in exchange for testimony, but the damage was done. Patricia called the 3 other victims who testified about Trevor assaulting them at previous parties. Their stories were eerily similar to mine and painted a pattern of predatory behavior that was impossible to ignore. The defense case took 2 days. Trevor testified in his own defense and said everything had been consensual. He said I'd been flirting with him all night and had told him I wanted to hook up. He said we'd gone to the basement together and fooled around, and I'd been conscious and participating until I passed out from too much alcohol. He said he'd panicked when I passed out and had left me on the couch to sleep it off. He said he never drugged me, and Derek must have been mistaken about what he saw. He said the other girls who testified were lying because they were jealous or looking for attention. He cried on the stand and said this lawsuit had destroyed his life and cost him his football scholarship. Trevor's lawyer called character witnesses, including coaches and teachers, who said Trevor was a good kid who'd never been in trouble before. They said he was being railroaded by a vindictive girl and a biased legal system. Patricia's cross-examination destroyed Trevor's credibility. She asked him about the texts where he'd said he was going to get me drunk and hit that. He said he'd been joking. She asked about the video showing him assaulting my unconscious body. He said he'd thought I was just sleeping. She asked why he'd left me alone in the basement, if he'd cared about my well-being. He had no good answer. Closing arguments happened on a Friday. Trevor's lawyer spent an hour arguing that I was lying or confused and that Trevor's future shouldn't be destroyed over a regretted hookup. He said teenage boys made mistakes but shouldn't have their lives ruined forever. He said Trevor had worked his entire life to get a football scholarship, and one night of accusations shouldn't take that away. Patricia spent 90 minutes methodically laying out the evidence. The texts showing premeditation, the photos showing drugging, the video showing assault of an unconscious victim, the medical evidence showing force, the pattern of prior assaults showing Trevor's methods, the institutional cover-up showing how Trevor had been protected. She said this case wasn't about ruining Trevor's future, but about holding him accountable for destroying mine. She said a football scholarship wasn't more important than my right to bodily autonomy. She said institutions needed to learn they couldn't protect rapists just because those rapists could play sports. The jury deliberated for 8 hours over 2 days before reaching a verdict. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The jury found Trevor Walsh liable for sexual assault and awarded me $2 million in damages. They found Derek Chambers liable for negligence and awarded an additional $500,000. They found Riverside High School liable for Title IX violations and awarded $1 million. The total judgment was $3.5 million. The courtroom erupted when the verdict was read. Trevor's supporters screamed that the jury was biased. My supporters cried and hugged each other. Trevor sat stone-faced while his lawyers immediately filed notice of appeal. Patricia hugged me and said we'd won, but the fight wasn't over because Trevor would appeal and the school would fight the judgment. I said I didn't care about the money. I cared that 12 strangers had believed me when my entire community hadn't. The verdict made national news. Sexual assault advocacy groups called it a landmark case showing that institutions couldn't protect predators without consequences. The verdict prompted investigations into other schools' handling of assault cases. Trevor's appeal was denied 6 months later and the judgment was upheld. Trevor's family declared bankruptcy to avoid paying the full amount, but the court seized his trust fund and garnished his parents' wages. Derek's parents paid the $500,000 to avoid garnishment. The school district paid the $1 million from their insurance fund and was required to implement new Title IX training and oversight. Principal Grayson was fired for gross mishandling of my case and several other assault cases that came to light during discovery. The football coach was fired for instructing players to coordinate false testimony. The district implemented new policies requiring immediate investigation of assault reports and prohibiting retaliation against victims. 3 months after the verdict, criminal prosecutors reopened my case with the new evidence from the civil trial. They charged Trevor with sexual assault, drugging, and witness tampering. He was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison. His appeal of the criminal conviction was also denied. 5 years later, I graduated from college with a degree in law and advocacy. I'd spent those years speaking at schools about institutional failures and victim support. I'd worked with legislators to pass laws strengthening Title IX enforcement and creating penalties for schools that protected predators. My case had become a landmark example in legal education about institutional liability and victim rights. Trevor served 6 years before parole and was required to register as a sex offender. His football career was over and his scholarship had been revoked the day he was convicted. Derek never played college football and worked at his father's business. Principal Grayson never worked in education again. The community that had attacked me eventually split between those who apologized and those who still insisted I'd ruined Trevor's life. I accepted the apologies and ignored the rest, because I'd learned that some people would always value athletic achievement over human dignity, but the law didn't have to agree with them, and neither did I. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too, so subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.